Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good evening. My name is Mateusz Fałkowski and I am deputy head of the Pilecki Institute in Berlin. Our guests tonight are Deborah Hartmann from House of the Wannsee Conference in Potsdam, but today with us from Jerusalem, Michaela Küchler from German Foreign Ministry in Berlin and International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, Piotr Zwinsky from Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in Oświęcim, and Hanna Radziejowska from Pilecki-Institut in Berlin. Together, we will discuss challenges for civic education in today's democracies, 76 years after liberation of Auschwitz camp. This discussion is held in English with simultaneous interpreting into German and Polish. The chat function is disabled. However, you can find a short evaluation survey there. If you want to ask questions, all questions to panelists, you can submit in a written form through Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Now I am telling you in German, in Polish shortly how to proceed with translation. Wenn Sie die deutsche Übersetzung suchen, müssen Sie Weltkugel-Symbol in Ihren Bildschirmen aussuchen und dort die Sprache finden, also der Deutsch. Jeśli chcą Państwo znaleźć polskie tłumaczenie, muszą Państwo na dole ekranu znaleźć symbol kuli ziemskiej i tam wybrać tłumaczenie na język polski. And now we switch to English back. And our discussion is under the title Auschwitz and Challenges for Historical and Civic Education. The anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz camp is a memorial day for the victims. Victims, former prisoners and Holocaust survivors are the ones we remember and whose voices we listen to, also in the context of education. The Auschwitz concentration and extermination camp is a symbol, but this symbol has also its material shape preserved for future generations through institutionalized action. We remember about Auschwitz and the Holocaust and make them the subject of education because of our values, because of the mentioned moral obligation towards the victims. It's our moral obligation to remember and pass this memory on. However, this general assumption doesn't change the fact that the goals and ways of talking about Auschwitz and the Holocaust may be different, may be various, as are the institutions dealing with it, as different are also the backgrounds of people involved in this challenge. Historians have developed various cognitive and analytical categories to describe the Shoah, and they find new testimonies and documents every year. While, for example, political science can focus, for example, on Holocaust distortion and instrumentalization. Remembrance and education is often as much a reaction to the history as our reaction to current events and discussions. So, should we remember autotelically about the Holocaust, German crimes and camps due to the same events? They are very important due to respect for the victims and survivors? Or do we think that this history and memory should serve something today and for the future? If so, what do we pay attention to? Where do we see blind spots? Finally, how we frame these events? Where do we see particular challenges? And about these questions, I will talk to distinguished guests, the directors of leading institutions dealing with preservation of memory and education. And they are tonight Deborah Hartmann. She's director of the House of the Wannsee Conference in Potsdam. She worked previously at the Jewish Museum in Vienna, the American Jewish Committee in Berlin, and between 2011 and 2014, Deborah Hartmann was the representative for the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial in Germany. In 2015, she went to Jerusalem to be responsible for Yad Vashem education and youth work on site. Ambassador Michaela Küchler is currently the German Foreign Office Special Representative for Relations with Jewish Organizations, Holocaust Remembrance, Anti-Semitism, and International Affairs relating to Sinti and Roma, and also current chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Our next guest, Piotr Cywiński, is historian, Polish historian, and director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum since 2006. He is public intellectual, author, and active participant of the Polish-Jewish and Christian-Jewish dialogue. And finally, Hanna Radziejowska is historian, director of the Pilecki Institute in Berlin, curator, producer, and scriptwriter of many cultural, historical, and museum projects. She has worked, among others, for the Warsaw Rising Museum, the History Meeting House in Warsaw, and Copernicus Science Center, also in Warsaw. She co-curated the exhibition The Volunteer, Witold Pilecki and His Mission in Auschwitz at the Pilecki Institute in Berlin. Well, what are the strategies of these leading institutions engaged in memory and education? How are we to reach young people and why? I start with a question to Piotr Cywiński, who is director of Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, as a very specific institution. What are, Piotr, what are conditions sine qua non for former concentration and extermination camps to be an effective place for education? What are your specific goals and challenges in this regard?
Good afternoon. Yes, of course, memorials are supposed to be some basic institutions of remembrance, as cemeteries, as monuments, as museums or educational centers, in cooperation, of course, with schools, with public, with, I don't know, individuals or media. And they have, memorials have in their own hands two types of authenticities. The authenticity of the testimonies, of the words, of the memories, all those books or films created with the help of survivors, and the authenticity of the site. And it is between those two authenticities that the role or the tools for playing their role is particularly visible in the memorials. The two main important, let's say, field of actions is in the preservation and in the education. Of course, when we are speaking about preservation, it's a little bit different for those who started directly after the war, and they had many remains, many buildings, many items. It's a little bit different for those who started relatively after some decades. But this goal is of course very, very important. And the second goal is education. And this education, of course, we have to go back on the history. We have to build the remembrance. But after that, or due to that, I think it's very clear that the main goals are ethical. We have to enlarge the feeling of responsibility for today and for tomorrow. So this is a question of some moral issues coming from the knowledge of the past. We have to build a sort of moral anxiety in those people who are traveling for visiting those memorials. A moral anxiety not turn only to the past, but turn to the today's times and to the future that we want to build together, that we have to develop for our children or children of our children. It was something very, very important for the prisoners and the victims themselves. The terminology of never again or all those kind of appeal, it's not a post-war creation. Never again was functioning already in the camp. When you read the testimonies, you see very, very clearly that one of the one of the important, let's say, moral need of the prisoners already in the camp is not only to survive, but it's that the world has to be informed and that the world have to do everything that is possible in order to not repeat this tragedy. So this is, I think, the most important goals. Of course, now during the COVID time, the education is relatively different because the main education was to be done in situ, on the very place of the crimes. But of course, we have some possibilities online, including social media, some books, publications, some traveling exhibitions. I think that every responsible of some sites that becomes memorial will agree with myself when I will hope that this COVID pandemic and all those difficulties will stop, will end as soon as possible.
Thank you, Piotr. And now a question to Deborah. So Deborah, you were sometime and you have educational experience in Yad Vashem, and just now, you take your new responsibilities as the new director of House of Wannsee Conference in Berlin. And what are your plans and what is your specific educational strategy for this institution?
Okay, so good evening and thanks for the invitation. So as you mentioned, I'm quite new in my position. So I'm almost there, like I'm the director of Wannsee for 2 months. So I think it might be too early to talk about a specific vision. And I think I don't have yet a precise strategy regarding the memorial and educational side. I would like to emphasize that the memorial did a great job, especially in the field of education and research. But of course, there have been many changes, not only a new director. There is a new historical exhibition that was just inaugurated shortly before the beginning of Corona, which means that our colleagues from the memorial don't have yet enough experience to work with this new exhibition. So at the moment, we are in the beginning of a redevelopment process. That means that together with my colleagues, we are analyzing the work of the memorial in the last decades. And then we need to decide together what we would like to keep and what we have to change. And part of this evaluation is as well to make a decision what kind of content we would like to strengthen in the upcoming years. And from my perspective, there are a few challenges for memorials. They aren't new. We could see those developments in recent years, but I think they are still unsolved. For example, as all of you know, memorials are more and more in the focus of political attention, either because they are seen as an obstacle for alternative, often nationalist historical narratives. This is the case for the AfD in Germany, for example, or they are used for specific political goals. And the question is how memorial respond to this, if they try to remain unpolitical or neutral, or if they accept that they have an impact on our societies, as Piotr just mentioned, and that we need to intervene from time to time, especially when certain values that are fundamental for our work are in danger. And another challenge that I see is, and I think it was also mentioned before, the connection between past and present. And here I would like to develop a strategy or a concept how contemporary topics or conflicts are connected to the history of the Holocaust. And last week, for example, we organized an event marking the 79th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference with the topic Anti-Semitism and the Shoah, between historization and contemporary relevance. That was the title of the event. So we raised the question how anti-Semitism today is related to anti-Semitism during the era of National Socialism. And of course, we could not solve it in 2 hours, but I think it became clear that we need to think and reflect about it further. So basically, we need to think about how memorial sites and historic learning can help to sharpen our awareness of everyday expressions of anti-Semitism, and at the same time to keep in mind the historical role of the Nazi anti-Semitism. So these are just 2 aspects where I would like to think about a strategy or a concept, and not only with my colleagues from the memorial in Wannsee, but maybe as well with other memorials. So maybe we can have some kind of exchange, what to do with these kind of challenges. So maybe, yeah, that would be maybe enough for now.
Thank you for this good proposal. So that Michaela, so that Deborah mentioned that one of the problems is perceived as from the perspective of director of memorial is this word of politics. And you are the special envoy of the government. You work with politicians within the world of politics. And what are the aims, goals, and also challenges in work of International Alliance of Holocaust Remembrance? And you, as your perspective as a special envoy, why do we need at all such a position within the government? Could you?
Good afternoon and good evening, and thank you very much, Mateusz, for organizing this this panel. I'm glad to be here with my colleagues from so prestigious organizations like the State Memorial of Auschwitz or the Haus der Wannsee Conference. The Holocaust represents a civilizational break that the world hadn't seen before, and which had also a global impact. I would like to underline here that Germany has a unique and never-ending responsibility to remember the atrocities committed during the Holocaust and to honor the victims and survivors. That is very important for me, that the public understands that this is a never-ending mission of Germany after the crime of the Holocaust. And that is why Germany is furthering Holocaust education, remembrance, research, why it is a strong member in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And what we, well, Holocaust remembrance, of course, is at the heart of the mission of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And it is very important to develop standards for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. And this is what the International Holocaust Remembrance has done. It released at the end of 2019 recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. They are available in English, but also in other languages. I think a Polish and German, and for sure a German translation are to be found online at holocaustremembrance.com. So this is one very important element of how to further remembrance. Another one is reacting to a political situation as we find it today, and which is Holocaust distortion, which we find spreading globally. We have elements like like for instance, demonstration against corona measures in Germany, where people are marching with yellow stars on their sleeves, reading not Jew but reading unvaccinated. So they compare themselves to Jewish men, women, and children that were persecuted during the Nazi regime. This is a clear case of Holocaust distortion. We have other cases like we have seen on 6th of January at the storm of the Capitol in the United States, in Washington, where people wore T-shirts with reading Camp Auschwitz as if it was a vacation camp. So this is really something that is worrying IRA a lot, and this is something that is worrying Germany a lot, and this is why German foreign minister already in January last year suggested a global task force against Holocaust distortion. This global task force has worked, and it has released on 19th of January recommendations for recognizing and countering Holocaust distortion. Why is it so important to counter Holocaust distortion? It is so important because Holocaust distortion paves the way for anti-Semitism. And we have seen Holocaust distortion a lot online, but now we have seen it also out on the streets. And it really threatens our democracies, our diversity, our diverse societies, our inclusive approach to living together. And the IRA under the German presidency has tried to find strategies about this worrying trend through, well, the definition of Holocaust distortion, which was already released in 2013, through the Global Task Force on Holocaust Distortion, and through the recommendations for recognizing and countering Holocaust distortion. And I would very much welcome if the institutions which are present here on this panel would like to join the German government and the IRA in distributing these recommendations, and also in having training sessions on these recommendations, so that policymakers, decision makers will become aware of what there is out there and how we can fight against it.
Thank you, Michaela. Hania, so you are head of Polish Historical Archival and Research Institution in Berlin. So you combine this experience and perception of Polish and German cultures of remembrance. How do you perceive it? So how you perceive the differences between both cultures of Polish culture of remembrance of Holocaust and German one?
So good evening. So I would like to tell something from this perspective of experience being here 1 year. We are quite new institution here in Berlin. And my basic reflection on these differences in this understanding of the Holocaust in Germany and Poland require some outlining some problems. So first, I would like to recall a very interesting study on the anniversary of the end of the Second World War carried out by Die Zeit in May 2020, last year. So there are 3 answers that I would like to read. 77% say that accounting for Nazi times in the face of the latest developments has become as important as ever. The 3% of respondents say that their grandparents formed the Third Reich, and 30% are convinced that their ancestors were opponents to Nazis. And for me, these answers are very interesting because on the one hand, they show that for Germans, this knowledge of the Holocaust is really part of the common consciousness. On the other hand, they show a certain essential, I would say, lack of awareness of the scale. I mean, it's not possible that only 3% of Germans had grandparents who formed Third Reich and 30 who had grandparents who fight against Third Reich. So it also shows the perspective of the belief. There are other answers that Germany is a model for the world, how to work through such a difficult history. And I mean, it seems to me that in relation to Poland and the Polish experience, it's a little bit much more difficult. So I heard that there is a very typical answer of German students in this Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, the typical answer on question how many German Jews were murdered during Holocaust, and the answer is 3 million. So this 3 million is in fact Polish Jews, yes. So I think in Poland, in contrary, in Poland there is awareness that Poland was this laboratory of extermination. This laboratory started in Poland in 1939. And this obvious example, Auschwitz camp, at the beginning was part of the Intelligenzaktion, in which 100,000 Polish leaders were murdered. And but in fact, what is for me very important, that when the extermination of Polish Jews ends, the extermination of Western Jews begins. And Holocaust studies teaches critical thinking, it teaches the capacity of for this ethical reflection. And I think what is really different is this awareness, the proportion and proximity of the extermination. And it's completely different in Poland in compared to Germany. I like in this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance guidelines, state that the Holocaust might not have happened. And this is a very true, shocking statement, and should compel us always to learn, of course, more, to find out more about the history of extermination of Jews, and to look for these moments when history could have been changed. And I would like here, from this Polish Jewish perspective, I would like to mention this story about Ringlebloom archive collection that is in Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, because Emanuel Ringlebloom is completely, I think in Germany, is completely unknown story. And Ringlebloom built the secret organization Onek Shabbat in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1940. There were teachers, historians, social activists who collected all materials and accounts which documented this terrible, horrible fate of Polish Jews. And these extraordinary collections were buried, first part, in August 1942. So it was just as Anna Frank was beginning to write her diary. And it was thanks to a BBC broadcast in June 1942, in which Onek Shabbat, these Onek Shabbat materials delivered by couriers and soldiers of the Polish underground state to London were used, and the world learned about the extermination of the Jews, about the gas chambers, and so on. Anna Frank notes in her diary that from this broadcast they learned about the fate of the Jews, and probably, perhaps, it was also this broadcast that made the Frank family go into hiding in Amsterdam 2 weeks after hearing it. And although the Ringlebloom archive has many volumes which are still being compiled, only now have 2 volumes been published in English. And I think there is still nearly nothing in German. And it is, however, one of the most important collections documenting the extermination of Jews in general. And it's, I think, unknown in the world still. Perhaps now it's changing, but very slowly. And why I'm mentioning this? Because the experience of the Holocaust in Poland shows this closeness of the Holocaust, this barbarity, the violence, and this hell that Europeans didn't want to see. This proximity to the Holocaust, where people were killed in front of their neighbors, in their villages, towns, it's completely different than when we compare to Western Europe. And it was something so terrible that people in Western, in Europe, in the world, they didn't want to believe it. And I think it's a very this very interesting question. Why the world keeps silent? The Polish Jews were dying. I mean, about this first period. I mean, what was the experience of the Eastern Jews and this perhaps, I mean, prejudice against Eastern Europe, Eastern Jews? Because I think this cry of the Polish Jews, when I think about Onek Shabbat and about this try of alarming the world about atrocities in occupied Poland, which was this cry which was not listened to and remained unanswered, is, I think it's today, I think it's very interesting, you know, to see it as a challenge for us, yes, today for politicians and all of us around the world. Can I react, and is it possible to distinguish what is really important from military and political goals and current affairs? And yes, I think, and also the second thing, what is very important when we discuss this education and about Holocaust, it's also, perhaps it's also, I think, unknown that the most of the crimes committed by the Third Reich, by the Germans against Polish Jews, after war, they went largely unpunished. And it's also very, very important when we talk about this post-war history and working through this story. So remembering and understanding this experience of Eastern Jews, and perhaps understanding what happened after war, that it's not so obvious that everything, everyone and every crime was punished.
So thank you. Deborah, you had, as I mentioned, this experience of both work with Israeli youth and German youth. So what is your perception of differences in remembrance, cultures of remembrance in Germany and Israel?
Maybe, I don't know if Michaela wanted to add something before. No, it's fine. Okay, I just saw you were raising your hand, so I didn't know if you would like to add something. So, I mean, one main difference in the memory culture in these two countries is, of course, the different approach that is very much connected to the Jewish experience or Jewish perspective in Israel, while Germany had, of course, come to term with its own involvement in the Holocaust, as we just heard. So Israeli memorials legitimately still focus mainly on the Jewish perspective. And I think it is very important for a memorial like Yad Vashem to deal with Jewish pre-war and post-war life, and to highlight as well the diversity of Jewish life before, during, and after the Holocaust. And I think that this might be still a difference to memorials in Germany, although remembrance culture in Germany reflects as well on individual stories and memories, at least for the last 10, 15 years, maybe even longer. So I would think that this is the main difference. And of course, that memorials in Germany, I mean, they need to focus as well on the questions of perpetrators, bystanders, and so on. And still, I mean, although for many Israelis the Holocaust is still a crucial part of their identity, Israel faces similar challenges to Germany or other places. And this is, for example, how to address a younger generation. So how to make this history relevant for a younger generation. So although the Holocaust is a relevant part in the society of many young Israelis, it is still not so clear how to make this history relevant for them.
Thank you, Michaela. So there are the questions maybe to you. So the first question which was asked in Q&A section, so was that about the connection between remembrance and today's life of Israel, of Jews in Germany, in today's Germany. with such an assumption or question that remembrance ignores the situation of Jews that live in Germany today, that today's synagogues are still well guarded and there's no Jewish life possible, as told among others by Henrik Broder or Eike Geisel. So so how to combine this in Germany, this present and past in this regard? And another question, from Caroline Gill, is about how much funding does the German federal government intend to allocate annually for the purpose of remembrance of Holocaust? Micro.
Thank you very much for these questions. I would, if you allow, first like to comment on what Hanna said, because I found that very interesting, what she said about the difference between Poland and Germany, and I partly agree also to what she said. Holocaust remembrance is deeply anchored in German collective consciousness, I would say. It is a subject in the curriculum of every school throughout the country, and it is being taught at different ages. So you get first in touch with the questions of Holocaust remembrance, I think in 6th grade at the age of 12 or 13, and that later on in 10th grade and in 11th or 12th grade once again. So you can approach it according to the age from different perspectives. But I agree with Hanna that Holocaust remembrance in Germany focuses on the murder of 6 million Jews, of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. And it also focuses on the death of Jews in concentration camps and in gas chambers. What Germans don't know very well about is the killing of Jews in mass shootings and the persecution of Jews in general in Eastern Europe. And what they know little about is the killing of, or is the genocide of the Sinti and Roma and other groups targeted by the Nazi perpetrators. We as Foreign Office, we try to compensate for that by financing projects like Erinnerung bewahren, which is a project about making dignified sites of remembrance at places of mass shootings, for the time being, mainly in Ukraine. Second comment I would like to make is to Ringlebloom. I'm very proud. I think the Ringlebloom archive is something extraordinary, and I'm really glad that it is being preserved in Warsaw in the Institute. I'm very proud to say that the German Foreign Office was able to finance an exhibition on the Ringlebloom archive, which was shown at the end of 2018, 2019, throughout Germany, but also in other countries, overseas and in Europe. The partner for this exhibition was the Memorial House der Wannsee Conference. So this is something I would like to say. Now I'm coming to the questions, remembrance and what about Jewish life in Germany? Well, first of all, I would like to say that in the German government, we don't only have this position of special representative for relations with Jewish organizations in the Federal Foreign Office, but since 2018, we have a government commissioner for fostering Jewish life in Germany and fighting against anti-Semitism. He's my predecessor, Dr. Felix Klein, in this posting at the Foreign Office, and he's now government commissioner for fostering Jewish life in Germany. One of his tasks is to to find ways and money to protect Jewish communities in Germany, so that Jewish life in synagogues, but also outside of synagogues, is possible. So security of Jewish communities is very important. But of course, getting to know how Jews in Germany live and how they are integrated into the society is, I think, the best protection one can wish. And there are programs which are being implemented by the Central Council of Jews in Germany itself, like the program Meet a Jew. But there's also a big program this year in 2021, 1,700 years of Jewish presence in the German lands. And we very much, that is being under the protection of the federal president. And we very much hope, as German government, we support this initiative coming from the Jewish communities in Germany, and we very much hope that it will lead us to a situation where Germans will get to know their Jewish neighbors much better than they do at the moment. The second question was again on.
It was the question about amount of money.
Okay, that's a difficult one because, well, first of all, we have the federal government. There is money at the Federal Foreign Office for projects on Holocaust remembrance. These projects need to have some relationship with issues abroad. Then, of course, you have programs that are being implemented or that are being financed by the Commissioner for Culture and Media. She mainly finances the memorial sites in Germany, but also programs by individuals, to my knowledge. Then we have this big program, Youth Remembers, which is being implemented by the foundation EVZ, Erinnerung, Verantwortung, Zukunft, Remembrance, Responsibility, Future, which is directed towards young people also from different countries, integrating young people from Israel, from Germany, from Poland, from France, from other countries, to learn together about the Holocaust. So it's very difficult. I really can't give you a number because also the Länder, the federal states, the municipalities, they do programs about Holocaust remembrance. As to the Federal Foreign Office, there is a sum of about 9 million euros available this year.
Thank you.
But I can't tell you about the other.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Piotr, could you comment on this cross-cultural question of different perspectives and different cultures of remembrance? Your perspective as director of institutions with probably the broadest international scope we can imagine. And I would like to ask you about how you see this differences between different national perspectives on Holocaust. Maybe people coming to Oświęcim now, probably not because of the pandemic, but you meet many people from many nations. And this is one question. And another one to you is about the problem of many different concentration camps, former concentration camps, and the idea of preservation and combination between normal life in the city and the preservation of this memorial site. So we had the problems, for example, in Vienna, in Gusen Mauthausen, so we're building were used by, let's say, normal people for normal life at the area where concentration camps was. So what is your opinion on that?
Of course, there's an enormous number of variety of different style of remembrance all around the world. Before the pandemic, we were guiding in more than 20, I think 22 languages in Auschwitz, receiving people from many, many different continents and countries and cultures and religions and way to remember. I would just maybe give you one quotation of a discussion that I've got several years ago with somebody coming from South Korea. And due to the pure hazard, I was just discussing with him somewhere on the field of Auschwitz I. And I asked him, why was he coming from Southern Korea to Auschwitz, now knowing that he has, I don't remember, 6 or 7 days in the whole Europe, so between Venice, Paris, I don't know, Roma, maybe, I don't know, Berlin. He decided to spend half of a day in Auschwitz, and he looked very astonished to me, to this question, and he answered me very quickly, I really wanted to understand Europe. And this was terrific, yeah. So certainly there are very different culture of remembrance. In some countries, the issue that we were speaking just before, the politicization of the remembrance is also from time to time present, and the memorials must serve the remembrance and the truth, and not some changing political options, of course, because if somewhere, not only in Europe, I say, somewhere in the world, there is a politicization or a risk of politicization of memorials, that means there is a risk of politicization not only of the history, but also of the pain, the very pain of the victims, and of the moral choice linked to the remembrance. So this is clear that it will be a betrayal of the role of the memorials. It's something very, very important. The style of remembrance changed a lot, and this is your second question, in the past. At some times it was not very difficult to build a villa in Gusen. Now more and more people are looking horrified to this idea, but it's not only the problem of Gusen. Everywhere when you have this border between the life and the dead, it creates some anthropological important problems to all of us. It can be on the terrain, but it can be in the heads, in the confrontation with some imaginations, in some religious approach. The Orthodox Jewish community is coming to Birkenau. It's a completely different experience than some, I don't know, soldiers of Israeli Air Force. Really, all those approaches are different, but all those approach has the right to confront themselves to this past, to remember by their own way. Just one thing on the Ringlebloom archives from the Warsaw Ghetto. I would like just to underline that it's now translated and published slow by slow in English, from the originals into the English. 3 tomes were published by the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. You can check them on the web. 3 are in preparation now. I don't know how many there will be, but the Polish edition is something like 36 tomes, and it's something really that it's the only one really relatively complete archives that was survived until now from a big ghetto in Europe.
So this topic of Ringlebloom archive is maybe also important from this perspective, that it highlights the agency of Jewish, not only victims, but also the agency of these people who were active, who wanted to rescue, to surrender, not to surrender. And this is my question: how to include in this Holocaust education how to include this agency. I mean, that the Jewish people were not only victims, passive victims, but also they fought, for example, in Warsaw Uprising, Ghetto Uprising, and in other places. So how to do it, how to include it into education?
No, it is a very difficult question if it is asked to me, because it's absolutely not our role in Auschwitz to educate about the rights among the nations, or about those Jews who tried to help from abroad or from inside, let's say, the Third Reich. I think it's there's some other institution for that. We are dealing with Auschwitz. We are dealing with really the end of this way. But of course, we must show to people all what was done by simple people or by the great of this world, like diplomats or some others, because it's very, very important for me that the young 60 or 65% of our visitors before the pandemic were young people, that those teenagers has to find some positive, let's say, examples in order to not only be in a deep sorrow after what they saw, but that they can imagine their own responsibility for the future. And this is a very important goal. But in Auschwitz, it's particularly difficult, of course.
Hanna.
So perhaps I would like to make a quick remark about this living in the place where you are so close to what happened, because in Warsaw I live, of course I live in Berlin, but in Warsaw I live in Muranów, so very close to Pilecki Museum, and it was always this experience of when there was any renovation, and really very small hole in the street or in the earth, you could see the ghetto, you could see the burned bricks, and once I found many things from the, I don't know, from the flat, the porcelain or something like this, and I couldn't sleep because I brought it to home and I couldn't sleep, and next day I took all these things and I gave them to Pilecki Museum, and they are now the artifacts, the objects of museum. And this experience, I think this is what I was trying to explain, that in Poland you have this, what happened, really, it's, you know, before your eyes. And when we talk about this, I think for me also, this question about the Holocaust and the challenges for education in this context of an attitude towards evil. So this is I think the most interesting question about the roles of what was mentioned, perpetrators, victims, but also those who could oppose evil. And because if we talk about victims, perpetrators, and bystanders, for example, we lose this extraordinary legacy of the, for example, ghetto uprising, or I don't know, Jewish partisans and Polish Jews who made decision to fight, knowing that they were fighting for their dignity, not to conquer. And I think these different ways of fighting, keeping testimonies, writing poems like Władysław Szlengel, or acting against the logic of occupation, sharing food when there was nothing. I think all these are also attitudes of heroism, and they also need to be taught to the young generation, perhaps especially nowadays. And there is another thing. I think this heritage of Polish Jews and Poles is also a little bit a heritage of this ability to resist. And again, it's very, very, very strongly on the experience of Polish Jews and the Polish underground state, about a political community. I'm saying this because for me, I'm granddaughter of Polish Jewish family, and it was always very important to underline Polish Jews were Polish citizens. And so it's a story about also, yes, this I would like to say about not on, I mean, this community, political community of Polish state. It's something different. It's a nation, not ethnical nation, but political nation. And of course, regardless of this evil, betrayal, collaboration, not political, not level of, and on this, at this level of individuals, that of course existed in Polish society. The Poles as a state, they fought from beginning to the end as an ally, and what I think is equally important, the Polish government in exile was the first to alert the world about the extermination of Jews, and this occupation condition, which were again incomparable to those in Western Europe, provoked this question. What was the opposition to evil? What is the opposition to evil? And yes, and this is a story about Ringlebloom archive, this opposition to evil, but also about Witold Pilecki. And I think for me, this is the greatest challenge of Holocaust education, to convey this experience that even in the most difficult and horrifying experience, you can act, you can do something as politicians, as ordinary people, yes, every citizen. And I would like to remind here that I greatly admire director Piotr Cywiński, because last month, I think, Piotr, as a director of Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, he fought to free a boy, a 13-year-old boy, I think, and he's freed from, Piotr Cywiński freed him from Nigerian prison. And I think it's an example how you can, I don't know, to show that this horrible testimony, I mean, legacy of what happened, it's also, you know, it's a question what today we can do and how we can act, and that we can act.
Michaela and then Deborah. Micro.
Sorry. Thank you very much. We have come together here today also to find out how we can reach young people to pass on the memory about the Holocaust and the genocide of the Roma. I would like to make two practical suggestions. The first one, or to draw your attention to two campaigns which are being supported by IRA. One is the campaign #ProtectTheFacts, and it is about protecting factuality in history. So we need to speak about facts and not about opinions about facts when we speak about the Holocaust and history in general, of course. And the second one is a project that is also being supported by IRA. It's where IRA is a partner. It's being implemented and was initiated by the Arolsen Archives. The Arolsen Archives are the biggest archive about victims of the Nazi terror in the world. They have a database of about 10 million pieces of paper, and they started to digitalize this database. And how do they do it? They do it with the help of a crowd. And this crowd, and I think this is something that is really interesting for young people to take part in. It's the campaign #EveryNameCounts. You enter the Arolsen Archives digitally, and you start typing into your computer the data which you find on a piece of paper which is being displayed on your screen. I think that is a very good way of bringing young people to Holocaust remembrance, especially in times of the pandemic when memorial sites cannot be visited. And well, my appeal to all those who are listening here is join this campaign, and also have a look at the campaign of Protect the Facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deborah, so how to problematize this ability to resist, according to you, and maybe other question from Federica Ligo, so who asks how to combine this. So because she suggested that for many people, for many teachers and students, so the visit to the concentration camp memorial counts as the whole of the Holocaust education. And the question is how to combine school curriculum with this special education. So as, for example, conducted by memorial sites and memorial institutions.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me because I couldn't hear you entirely, but I think I understood your question. Okay, so maybe to the question of the audience, I don't know, I was working for 14 years now, mainly with the German educators and teachers that came to Yad Vashem for 1 week, for a 2-week seminar. And I didn't have the feeling that that it's only the memorial that has to teach about the Holocaust. So it's a little bit difficult for me to say now, because actually in Germany, as also Michaela Küchler just mentioned, there is a whole curricula how to teach the Holocaust to students when they are about 14, 15, and then again 17, 18 years old. So, and of course, visiting a memorial is part of it. So for Germany, for example, I don't see a problem here. So of course, memorials still have to work much more intense with teachers, I think. So they should be conducted much more teacher training seminars as well in Germany from my perspective. But you cannot say that actually, like the teachers who are interested in the topic and who care, they actually teach it in school. Another maybe problem in Germany are textbooks and that need to be revised. But that's a different issue. Maybe we don't have so much time now to open up a discussion, but I wanted maybe to add something to Hanna. I mean, you came up with many different aspects that from my point of view, they're a bit more complex and ambivalent. For example, you mentioned the Polish government in exile, and I remember that Yad Vashem historians, for example, pointed out that there were only a few cases where the government expressed itself clearly about the murder of the countless Jewish population. So I just want to bring it as one example that I have the feeling that the history is much more complex and ambivalent. And maybe to the question you just had, like how to highlight in historical education the fact that the victims were not only passive victims. I would agree to what was said already. I actually do not use the term victims at all. I think it's a very problematic term, and I think we need to reflect about it. And of course, if I hear someone speaking of victims, I have almost automatically a passive human being in mind. And therefore, I would suggest to speak about those who were murdered and those who survived or those who witnessed. And the main issues that relate to those, while asking ourselves how they lived throughout those years, what dilemmas did they face, what decisions and actions did they make. And I think we just mentioned the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and of course this is one example for resistance against the Nazi. But as was mentioned before, this was not the only way to resist. There were other forms of resisting, like educating children in ghettos, or the Ringlebloom archive. We heard about it a lot today. And so I think that basically we need to change our point of view, because if we continue to use these kind of terms like victims or perpetrators, so of course we have in mind that victims are, that being a victim is something passive, while being a perpetrator is someone who is active. And so I think we need to change our our point of view and think about the terms we use and to reflect about it.
I just wanted to ask you about the usage of national affiliation, so to say. So the national, but should we distinguish between, let's say, German Jews, French Jews, Polish Jews, or should we in this education focus on the whole group? Is this so in a way such as post-national culture of remembrance that we are talking about Jews, similarly as we are talking about Sinti and Roma, and we don't use any notion of national origin of or background or the place where they were. What do you think about it? Because I think so. The question about national. So the usage of nationalism, so to say, is somewhat discussed nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. And I think someone mentioned also like some figures, like that German students usually think that there have been 3 million Jews German Jews who were murdered. So in educational approaches, we are usually not focusing on numbers, but on personal stories. And this also implies to accept the self-definitions of those speaking. So that means we are focusing on their self-expressions, either in testimonies or in historical ego documents. And so we need to take into account as well that the discrimination and persecution of Jews in Germany was different in contrast to the persecution of Jews in Poland, France, and so forth. So I think it's important, first of all, to keep in mind these differences, and also to keep in mind that we need actually to focus much more on the self-expression of the so-called victims. But nevertheless, I think that we need to regard the history of the Holocaust as a transnational event. And if we are able to do so, then of course the question of nationality becomes less relevant.
Can I comment something, because I would like to answer Deborah about, of course, Polish government in exile, because I would like to give one example. It is the project of Ładoś list. It's a great example how we have discovered 2 years ago how few things are known, because the story about Ładoś and Polish diplomats who forged the Paraguayan passes and they sent them to ghettos in Poland, but also to Amsterdam, Polish diplomats who were trying to rescue also German Jews and as in all Europe. It was not known story. So I think when we discuss what the Polish government in exile did, it's a discussion about many research scholar programs that really have been started a few years ago, and we are on the way that we discover many things that we didn't know. And well, I would discuss it, and I would like to say that I really admire Polish government in exile, and I can say many good things about this, but it's not the discussion about this here. So just to mention that this remark that I think we haven't finished, and it's also very important what we discuss about this challenge of Holocaust education, that there is a lot to do also in this field of research, of discussion, of that's really also in this relationship Polish, German, Jewish. I think it's really a great task for all of us.
So we have to finish our discussion. So I have the final question to all panelists. So what is your one singular challenge you think is the most important for Holocaust education, or education about Auschwitz, or Holocaust remembrance in general? So what is maybe blind spot, so which wasn't addressed until now? So what is, so if you should mention one thing or one point, one bullet point, so what would be this issue?
Well, if you allow me to start, I would say, how can we replace the personal testimony of the survivors? They are slowly passing away. There are very few still among us. How can we replace their personal testimony?
Thank you. Hania?
Most difficult question. I think what I mentioned, I think this building the spaces for dialogue and education, because I mean, I think what is the great challenge when we try to understand our perspectives, and for me what is the most important is this Eastern perspective, that we need to have this, I don't know, safe place where we meet, discuss, and can be different also. I mean, that we can also have different opinions and try to get to know what really has happened and understand each other. I think it's in this small scale and this great big scale. I think it's from my perspective this is what I think.
So I think tonight's discussion is part of this space. So Piotr?
I think the most important now is how to help people in the remembrance to find some sources for a moral anxiety for today and tomorrow. This is a crucial issue, because we are ready to remember, we are not ready to act today, and this is terrible.
Thank you. Deborah?
Yeah, I would agree to that, but one challenge is, I think, still Holocaust memory and education on social media, as well as other topics related to historical awareness and digital literacy. I think all of us remember the TikTok debate a few months ago about the TikTok challenge. And I have the feeling, also as an educator, I mean, nobody asked about the intentions of the TikTok users, for example. We were criticizing them very harshly, but I think we do not have yet a full understanding of such social media trends and of this new form of mediated Holocaust-related testimony, because it stands in contrast to traditional practices of Holocaust commemoration that we are familiar with. And so I have the feeling that there is a challenge. What's the role of social media when it comes to Holocaust commemoration? And yeah, I think we need to do some research, and we also need to develop social media strategies.
So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to answer all the questions which were asked in Q&A section. So we can promise that we will continue this discussion. So about 180 people were at our discussion today. So, and we would like to thank you all. And we guarantee we will try to answer these questions, and we guarantee that we will continue this discussion. There were proposals here in the panel to strengthen this relationship between the institutions and we will try to do it. We'll try to discuss all the challenges facing civic and historical education regarding Holocaust and Auschwitz. And I would like to thank all the panelists for inspiring views. I would like to thank Patrick and Marek for technical support. My thanks go also to Gisela and Carolina for translation. And we would like to thank to the whole team of Pilecki Institute Berlin.